I'll be speaking to Joe Cirincione. He's a national security analyst and author with over 40 years of experience. He's been a congressional staffer, a program director, a philanthropist, an advisor to the State Department in 3 presidential campaigns, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Stanley. Thank you for having me on.
I want to talk about your extensive and impressive record opposing nuclear weapons. But first, I want to ask about an article you have on your strategy and history Substack called Joe Biden's Worst Foreign Policy Idea. Let's start off with that title. What do you think is his worst foreign policy idea?
Biden has a number of major accomplishments, including basically digging us out of the ditch that Trump left us in and restoring alliance relationships, making NATO larger and stronger than it's ever been, helping Ukraine, probably his best foreign policy achievement to date, and getting the U.S. serious about climate change, among other major accomplishments. But this deal that he wants to make with Saudi Arabia is probably the worst foreign policy idea I've seen in a very long time. I am perplexed as to what they think they're getting out of it. I really don't understand the drivers behind it, although we can speculate as we go on. But basically, the idea is that Biden would broker the diplomatic recognition between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Saudi Arabia has been a holdout in the region, while other smaller states have made restored diplomatic relations with Israel, basically during the Trump administration or during the Camp David Accords earlier. Saudi Arabia has held out. Saudi Arabia insists that Palestinians must be granted their own homeland. Israel, of course, refuses to do that. Biden believes that he can broker a deal where Saudi Arabia would recognize Israel. Israel would then make major concessions to the Palestinians to keep open the possibility of a two-state solution. And then in exchange, as a reward to Saudi Arabia, the United States would give it a mutual defense pact, similar to what we have with South Korea or Japan. This would be unprecedented. It's been almost 60 years since we've made a defense pact with a country that wasn't a democracy. Back 1953, with then the dictator of South Korea was the last time we did this. And in exchange, also, if that wasn't enough, the Biden administration would make a nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia, allowing it to proceed with the development of a civilian nuclear power program. And here's the important part, that included Saudi Arabia enriching uranium on its own territory, exactly what Saudi Arabia objects to Iran doing, because if you can enrich uranium for civilian fuel, you also have the same capability to enrich it for the cores of weapons. Same machines, same factories, just running at a different tempo, a different enrichment ratio. So that's the sort of, three-corner shot they're trying to pull off here. Diplomatic recognition, mutual defense pact, concessions for the Palestinians, and a civilian nuclear program for Saudi Arabia. This is just a terrible idea. It would sacrifice core U.S. security interests in stopping the spread of nuclear weapons, and in pulling us out of the Middle East. Instead, it would bring us deeper back into the Middle East, in this case, committing American lives for the defense of a theocratic monarchy. I just don't see the upside of this.
All right, we'll get into more of those details. But first, would Congress have to approve this mega deal?
If it was in the form of a treaty, it would absolutely require 2/3 of the Senate to approve it. And usually mutual defense pacts, like the one we have with Japan, South Korea, or the NATO agreement, are approved by the Senate. Yes, so that would mean he would have to get 67 senators to vote in favor of his arrangement.
Now, let's go back into your work as a national security analyst. How did you train for that, and for whom did you work?
In 1981, I came down to go to the Graduate School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and I got a master's there in international security. And while I was there, I was a teaching assistant to a neoconservative professor, a guy named Scott Thompson. And I worked closely with him. And when he joined the Reagan administration, he brought me in as his special assistant. That's where I got my first secret security clearance, where I helped organize interagency working groups and things like that. So I started getting my real training on the job. A few years after that, I joined the staff of the House Armed Services Committee and worked for 10 years up on Capitol Hill, doing oversight over major defense programs, NATO relations, nuclear weapons policy, the so-called Star Wars program, and that's the Strategic Defense Initiative. And that's where I really got into the nuclear weapons. I was assigned it as a congressional staffer, and I would, tour the country, go to bases, go to factories, go globally to international conferences, with meetings with foreign officials. And it was those 10 years that really gave me my doctorate in nuclear weapons policy, so to speak. I then left Congress and spent 15 years in the think tank world, directing programs at the Henry L. Stimson Center. I was director for the nuclear program at the Carnegie Endowment for 9 years, organized their big international conference, which I created while I was there. Then over to become vice president for national security at the Center for American Progress. And finally, I became president of Plowshares Fund, a small philanthropical organization, a foundation dedicated to the elimination of nuclear weapons. And I'd led that foundation in its expansion and development of its work here in Washington, D.C. for over 12 years. And I recently retired a few years ago. And now I write, lecture, and give interviews.
And speaking of writing, could you mention just a couple of the books you've written?
Sure. That one over there in the corner. It's the one I wrote at the Carnegie Endowment with that globe on it. That's Deadly Arsenals. It's basically an encyclopedia of chemical, nuclear, and biological weapons. It was used in college campuses around the world, really, for many, many years. My last two books were Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons, and then Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late, all about either the history of nuclear weapons, what are they, how are they made? Why do countries want them? Why do countries not want them? And then also Nuclear Nightmares, I tracked the evolution of the Obama nuclear policy from its greatest successes to its greatest failures. I haven't written a book since then. That was about 10 years ago. I don't think I'm going to anymore. It's a lot of work. And now I mainly do long pieces, long articles or short op-eds, but nothing book-length.
Okay, so let's get into this mega deal a bit. In your article, you wrote, Biden wants to pledge the lives of U.S. troops to defend the kingdom being Saudi Arabia. Why would we want to do that, send our troops?
I really don't understand the logic. I mean, that's what a mutual defense pact is. If Saudi Arabia is attacked, we pledge to come to their defense. So if Iran, for example, were to repeat its drone attacks on Saudi oil facilities that they did several years ago, you may remember they blew up a couple of oil storage tanks, we would be obligated to go to war to defend Saudi Arabia against that Iranian attack. At a time when President Biden is apparently trying to pull us out of the Middle East, that's what his withdrawal from Afghanistan was all about, it would seem counterproductive to enmesh us further in. I believe, and I want to be fair to the staffers who are pushing this, the effort is being led by White House Middle East Director Brett McGurk, very smart man. No, I know him, very good man. He seems to believe that by doing this, we would actually stabilize relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and would require less U.S. military presence in the region. And therefore, we might be able to pull out of some of the big bases that we've established since 1991. For example, the big naval base at Bahrain. I don't see that happening. I don't know why he thinks that would be the case. It would seem to be drawing us further in. So that's really, one of the big concerns is it enmeshes us deeper in the volatile geopolitics of the Middle East, a region, honestly, we care less and less about as oil is less and less important to us. I don't think Americans are going to care what goes on in the Middle East in a couple of decades because it won't matter to us. We won't be dependent on that oil for fuel or for petrochemicals.
It's a good point. And of course, they always say this is only for defensive purposes, but we see with MBS and his interference in the Yemeni civil war, whatever motive he had ended up being incredibly aggressive in that country,
right.
Hundreds of thousands of deaths.
That's exactly right. The richest country, the largest, richest country in the Middle East attacked the smallest, poorest country in the Middle East and couldn't win the war. This was MBS's hubris. He thought he was going to demonstrate his chops, this young 20-something then man in the line to succeed his father as the ruler of Saudi Arabia. He thought this was going to make his name. It's ended into be a humanitarian disaster, a debacle for Saudi Arabia. It still drags on. Fortunately, the actual fighting is in a lull. There's been a ceasefire that's been holding now for many months, but no end to the war. And that apparently is not part of the deal that Saudi Arabia should end its wars. I see no mention of that in any of the frameworks that have been floated in the press.
Yeah, good point. Now, part of the deal would mean a nuclear program for Saudi Arabia. Isn't that a risk of yet allowing another country to build nuclear weapons?
It is absolutely a risk. There aren't many issues in Washington that can unite the right and left at this point, but this is one of them. A couple of weeks ago, 20 prominent nuclear experts signed a joint letter condemning the Saudi deal on exactly this point. It wasn't about anything else. It was just this deal. And these were people who have been opposed to any kind of diplomatic arrangements with Iran because they want to have a regime change in Iran in order to end their nuclear program. And it's for people, it included people who are for the diplomatic relations with Iran that resulted in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the only deal that has actually restrained Iran's nuclear weapons. These two groups have been at each other's throats, but they united to oppose this. Why? Because it's fundamentally the same issue. There's nothing wrong with the country wanting civilian nuclear reactors. I mean, let's put the environment and the cost and the waste and the danger problems aside. But if a country, I know, but if a country wants to build a nuclear power, if they think this is part of their energy mix, and Saudi Arabia claims that's what it wants to do, you can go ahead and do that. Lots of countries have nuclear reactors. The kicker is that most countries with nuclear reactors buy their fuel from the few countries that make it. So the European consortium called Urenco, or they buy it from Russia or China or the United States. There's plenty of places to buy fuel. There's an oversupply of uranium fuel in the world right now. So when a country says it wants to build a couple of reactors and it also wants to build a facility for enriching uranium for the fuel, you get suspicious. Why are they doing this? It doesn't make economic sense. It's much cheaper to buy the fuel from somebody else than to build your own plant, unless you have more than 20 reactors. This is why we're suspicious of Iran. Iran has one reactor and it's built and has a uranium enrichment plant, and we're suspicious that its real purpose is to make material for the core bombs, because the same centrifuges that can spin the gas and enrich it to 3% for fuel could just keep spinning that gas and enrich it to 90% for the core of nuclear weapons. Same machines, same factory, different configurations, different enrichment times, but you get the same results. So the United States has had a policy of not allowing countries that it aids in getting civilian nuclear power plants, not allowing those countries to also get enrichment plants. Famously, about 10 years ago, we made a deal with the United Arab Emirates, which we call the gold standard, where we helped the United Arab Emirates build 2 nuclear reactors, which they now have. But that country said, we will never enrich uranium. They promised to never try to get enriched uranium. You let Saudi Arabia do this, and Saudi Arabia is insisting on it. Well, UAE is going to want to renegotiate that deal. Other countries like South Korea are going to say, wait a minute, why can't we enrich uranium? We're much more trustworthy than Saudi Arabia. And you can see the proliferation spillover. And that's why all nuclear experts across the spectrum are united in saying, don't do this. Don't let Saudi Arabia do it. You will unleash a nuclear arms race in the region. And as the Saudis themselves say, if Iran goes ahead and builds a nuclear weapon, they will build one too. Well, right now they can't build one. The only way they can build one is if we give them the factories to enrich uranium that can build their bombs. That's at the core of why so many of us think this is an incredibly dumb idea.
Now, if I may, at this point, I want to give a plug for a brand new website I've been developing. It's nomegadeal.com. There's a dash in between no and mega deal. It's set up for one purpose, to oppose this deal. Now, a third party in the deal that we haven't said much about is the Netanyahu government of Israel. In his UN speech, Netanyahu was all positive about this deal, a new era, and so on and so forth. Why would he want this deal with Saudi Arabia?
He's desperate. He has a hugely unpopular government. There are demonstrations that take place every week with tens of thousands of people demonstrating against his government. He's got a coalition government with the far right, the worst elements of Israeli society, really fascist elements, Jewish supremacist elements in there who want to rid all of Israel of Palestinians, who want to completely annex the occupied West Bank. Those are the people in his coalition. He's hanging on by a thread. He has a couple of seat majority in the parliament, in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Such a deal would greatly elevate his status. Now Netanyahu would be the deal maker. He'd be the one who ended the animosity with Saudi Arabia. He would be seen as the peacemaker. And so that this has been an enormous boost for the autocratic Netanyahu, which is the other part of this, which I don't understand. Why does the Biden administration want to do that? Why do you want to elevate this man that most of Israeli society wants to get rid of? Why would you do that? Well, the only possibility is that if he would then, in return, to make major concessions to the Palestinians, something he's highly unlikely to do. For example, 20 senators just this week, led by Chris Van Hollen and Chris Murphy and the Majority Whip Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth and Peter Welsh up in Vermont. Those are the 5 senators that led it. 20 Democratic senators sent a letter to Biden saying, don't do this deal. Don't do this. And if you are going to go ahead and do it, make sure that you guarantee that Israel, for example, will cease all settlements on the West Bank. That would be a real gain. Stop making the problem worse. Grant democratic rights to the Palestinians in occupied Israeli territory. That would be a major gain. But Netanyahu can't do that because the settler coalition that he's built his government on wants to increase and are increasing the demolition of Palestinian villages, the construction of Jewish-only settlements in the West Bank, the expulsion of Palestinians from Israel proper. He could not make that concession. The coalition would fall. So there's no chance that this deal is going to result in an appreciable gain for the Palestinians. And in so doing, it would probably doom any two-state solution, not make the region safe for a two-state solution. It would probably doom our ability to actually realize a true peace, and that peace has got to be between Israelis and Palestinians.
Then, as we see Joe Biden, who vowed he would make MBS a pariah, then gives him the fist bump, then the warm handshake, and so on. The Palestinians who are talking about this assume they're just going to be completely thrown under the bus and ignored, and maybe a bribe given to someone or someone else.
Yeah. So you can see at this very high level, it's sort of it's a geopolitical deal. You want to make deals with this monarch and this autocrat, and you want to give them something in return for this, and you believe you will come away with the crowning jewel of your first 4 years in office, this diplomatic achievement. They'll call it a peace deal. They will say this is bringing peace, but it won't. It won't mean any peace for the Palestinians. It won't mean peace for Yemen. It's just that a deal between two autocratic rulers and the greatest democracy on earth, the United States. It's such a tawdry, sad arrangement. I truly do not understand why Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, is pursuing this with such fervor. I know Jake. I know him pretty well. I know the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. I don't get it. I don't understand what's driving this. And I hate to say this, but I sincerely hope they fail. I hope the demands of these autocrats prove too much, even for a Biden White House eager for the glory of a Middle East deal.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. We'll link to your Substack article on thestruggle.org, and it's already up on nomegadeal.com. Thank you.
Excellent. And link to the letter from the 20 senators. It's really quite well written. And that's
up there
almost
too,
half
yeah.
the Democratic caucus. I mean, that pretty much assures that Biden could not get this agreement approved by the Senate. So maybe that will give him a pause if your podcast does not.
I hope so. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Stanley.